What you're about to hear is a tale so horrifying, so steeped in carnival madness and supernatural terror, that it has haunted the masked balls and hidden courtyards of New Orleans for over a century. This is not merely a story of partygoers who wandered into the wrong building or fell victim to a tragic accident during Mardi Gras festivities. This is the documented account of 25 of the most prominent and wealthy revelers in New Orleans society who received mysterious invitations to an exclusive masquerade ball in a mansion that had been forbidden to human habitation for decades, and the 9 survivors whose testimonies would forever change how the people of the Crescent City understood the true price of indulgence, the power of ancient curses, and the terrible consequences that await those who dance with forces beyond human comprehension. This is the true story of the Maison Mardi incident of 1902, where the carnival never ended, and where the masks became permanent fixtures that could never be removed. The year was 1902, and New Orleans was experiencing one of the most extravagant and debauched Mardi Gras seasons in its history. The city had recovered from the economic devastation of the Civil War and Reconstruction, and the wealthy elite were determined to celebrate their restored prosperity with a carnival season that would surpass all previous festivities in its opulence, excess, and sheer hedonistic abandon. The masked balls, elaborate parades, and private parties that characterized Mardi Gras had become increasingly competitive, with each social gathering attempting to outdo the others in terms of luxury, exclusivity, and shocking entertainment. The French Quarter, which had always been the spiritual heart of New Orleans' carnival celebrations, was alive with music, dancing, and revelry that continued from dawn to dawn throughout the weeks leading up to Fat Tuesday. The narrow streets were filled with costumed celebrants, the balconies overflowed with partygoers throwing beads and doubloons to the crowds below, and every mansion, hotel, and private residence seemed to be hosting elaborate entertainments that pushed the boundaries of propriety and good taste. Among the most sought-after invitations of the 1902 carnival season were those to the exclusive parties hosted by the city's oldest and most prestigious families. These events were attended only by members of New Orleans' highest society, wealthy plantation owners, successful merchants, prominent politicians, and cultural leaders whose names appeared in the social registers and whose approval could make or break careers and reputations throughout the South. The 25 revelers who would enter the Maison Mardi on that fateful Mardi Gras night represented the absolute pinnacle of New Orleans society. They were men and women whose wealth, breeding, and social connections had given them access to every exclusive event and private gathering in the city, but who were always seeking new forms of entertainment that would provide them with experiences that were even more exotic, exclusive, and thrilling than what they had previously encountered. Leading this group of elite revelers was Beauregard Ashworth III, the heir to one of Louisiana's largest sugar fortunes and a man whose reputation for extravagant living and exotic tastes had made him a legendary figure in New Orleans society. Beauregard's parties were famous throughout the South for their opulence, their shocking entertainment, and their complete disregard for conventional moral boundaries. His presence at any social gathering was considered a guarantee that the evening would be memorable, though not necessarily in ways that the participants would want to remember. Among the invited guests was Celeste Thibodeau, a wealthy widow whose late husband had made his fortune in the cotton trade and whose own beauty, intelligence, and social connections had made her one of the most influential women in New Orleans society. Celeste's salon was the gathering place for artists, writers, politicians, and other cultural figures, and her approval could launch careers or destroy reputations with equal efficiency. The group also included Maximilian von Habsburg, a European aristocrat who had come to New Orleans seeking new investments and exotic experiences that were not available in the more civilized capitals of Europe. Maximilian's title, wealth, and sophisticated European manners had made him a favorite among New Orleans society, but his interest in the occult and supernatural had also given him a reputation for dabbling in dangerous and forbidden knowledge. From the world of New Orleans politics came Senator Thaddeus Grimm, whose influence in the Louisiana legislature had made him one of the most powerful men in the state. Grimm's ability to manipulate laws, control government contracts, and influence judicial decisions had made him wealthy beyond measure, but his appetite for power and pleasure had also led him to seek experiences that went far beyond conventional political corruption. The remaining 21 revelers represented every aspect of New Orleans' elite society: bankers whose financial empires controlled the flow of money throughout the South, merchants whose trading networks extended around the world, cultural patrons whose support determined which artists and entertainers would succeed or fail, and social leaders whose approval was necessary for acceptance into the highest levels of New Orleans society. The invitation that brought these 25 individuals together came in the form of an elaborate card written on parchment that seemed to be centuries old and sealed with wax that bore the imprint of symbols that none of them recognized but that somehow seemed familiar and disturbing. The invitation promised an evening of entertainment beyond imagination, at an address in the French Quarter that was known to all of them but that had been empty and abandoned for as long as anyone could remember. The Maison Mardi, as it was known to locals who were brave enough to speak its name, was a magnificent Creole mansion that had been built in the 1780s by a wealthy planter whose family had been among the original French colonists of Louisiana. The mansion's architecture was a masterpiece of colonial design, with soaring ceilings, elaborate ironwork, and spacious rooms that had once hosted some of the most elegant social gatherings in the city's history. But the mansion's beauty had been overshadowed by its dark reputation, which stretched back over a century to a series of mysterious deaths and supernatural incidents that had made it uninhabitable. The original owner, Comte Etienne de Marigny, had been found dead in the mansion's ballroom under circumstances that had never been explained, surrounded by the corpses of his guests who had apparently died during a masquerade ball that had somehow gone horribly wrong. Since that time, the mansion had remained empty despite numerous attempts by various owners to restore it to habitable condition. Workers who attempted to renovate the building would suffer accidents, become ill, or simply refuse to continue their work after experiencing phenomena that they could not explain. The few brave souls who had attempted to spend nights in the mansion had either fled in terror or been found the next morning in states of complete madness that required permanent confinement in asylums. The mansion's reputation had made it a subject of fascination for New Orleans elite, who would often dare each other to approach the building or to spend time in its courtyard during their more adventurous moments, but none had ever been foolish enough to actually enter the building, as the stories of what had happened to previous visitors were too well documented and too terrifying to ignore. The invitation to the masquerade ball at the Maison Mardi was therefore both thrilling and terrifying. To the 25 recipients, the promise of an exclusive party in the most forbidden location in New Orleans was irresistible to people who had experienced every other form of entertainment that money could buy, but the reputation of the mansion made them all aware that accepting the invitation might involve risks that went far beyond social embarrassment or financial loss. On the night of Mardi Gras, February 25, 1902, the 25 revelers gathered outside the Maison Mardi as the clock struck midnight. They were dressed in the most elaborate costumes and masks that money could buy, outfits that had been specially created for this exclusive gathering and that reflected their wealth, status, and sophisticated tastes. The costumes ranged from historical recreations of European court dress to exotic designs inspired by cultures from around the world, but all were unified by their extraordinary quality and their obvious expense. The mansion itself appeared to have been transformed for the occasion. The building, which had stood dark and empty for decades, was now brilliantly illuminated with thousands of candles that cast dancing shadows through the windows and created an atmosphere of warmth and welcome that seemed to contradict everything the revelers had heard about the building's sinister reputation. The front door of the mansion stood open, revealing an interior that had been restored to a magnificence that exceeded even the most optimistic descriptions of its original grandeur. The entrance hall was decorated with flowers, tapestries, and artwork that seemed to represent the finest examples of European and American craftsmanship, and the air was filled with the sounds of music and laughter that suggested a party already in progress. As the 25 guests entered the Maison Mardi, they found themselves in an environment that seemed to have been designed specifically to cater to their tastes and expectations. The mansion's rooms had been arranged to provide different types of entertainment: a ballroom where couples could dance to music performed by an orchestra of exceptional skill, a gaming room where high-stakes gambling could satisfy the most adventurous risk-takers, a dining room where exotic foods and rare wines were served by attentive servants, and private chambers where more intimate entertainments could be pursued away from the eyes of other guests. The other partygoers who were already present when the invited guests arrived were dressed in costumes that were even more elaborate and exotic than those worn by the 25 revelers. These mysterious attendees seemed to represent every historical period and cultural tradition, with some wearing the elaborate court dress of European royalty, others dressed as ancient Egyptian pharaohs or Roman emperors, and still others costumed as figures from mythology and legend. Beauregard Ashworth III, whose experience with exclusive parties had given him a sophisticated understanding of social dynamics, immediately recognized that this gathering was unlike any he had previously attended. The level of luxury and attention to detail exceeded even his own legendary parties, and the other guests seemed to possess a knowledge of etiquette and social graces that suggested they were members of the highest levels of international society. Celeste Thibodeau was impressed by the cultural sophistication of the entertainment, which included performances by musicians, dancers, and artists whose talent seemed to exceed anything she had encountered in the salons of New Orleans or even in the cultural capitals of Europe. The conversations she overheard among the other guests revealed knowledge of art, literature, and philosophy that suggested they were among the most educated and cultured individuals in the world. As the evening progressed and the party reached new heights of luxury and excess, the 25 invited guests began to notice subtle details that suggested this gathering was not entirely what it appeared to be. The servants who attended to their needs moved with a fluid grace that seemed almost supernatural. The food and wine they consumed seemed to have flavors and effects that exceeded anything they had previously experienced, and the music that filled the mansion seemed to come from instruments that produced sounds no normal orchestra could create. Maximilian von Habsburg, whose interest in the occult had given him knowledge of supernatural phenomena, began to suspect that the party was not taking place entirely within the normal boundaries of reality. The other guests, despite their obvious wealth and sophistication, seemed to possess characteristics that suggested they might not be entirely human, and the mansion itself seemed to be larger and more elaborate than should have been possible given its external dimensions. The masks worn by the other partygoers were particularly disturbing to those guests who looked at them closely. The elaborate facial coverings seemed to be made from materials that were not quite fabric, metal, or any other substance that could be easily identified, and they appeared to be attached to their wearers' faces in ways that suggested they might not be removable. Some of the masks seemed to move and change expression independently of their wearers' actions, and a few appeared to be made from materials that resembled human skin. As midnight approached and the party reached its climax, the true nature of the gathering began to reveal itself. The mysterious host of the party finally appeared, emerging from the shadows of the mansion's upper floors to greet his guests and to explain the real purpose of the evening's entertainment. The figure who descended the mansion's grand staircase was dressed in the elaborate court costume of an 18th-century French aristocrat, but his appearance was both magnificent and terrifying. His face was hidden behind a mask that seemed to be made from gold and precious stones, but his eyes, which were visible through the mask's openings, glowed with an inner light that had nothing to do with reflected illumination. His voice, when he spoke, carried harmonics that seemed to come from the mansion itself rather than from any human throat. The entity revealed itself to be the spirit of Comte Etienne de Marigny, the mansion's original owner who had died during the mysterious masquerade ball over a century earlier, but death had not ended his existence. It had transformed him into something that existed between the world of the living and the realm of the dead, and had given him the power to host parties that transcended the normal boundaries of time and space. The Comte explained that the Maison Maudite existed as a supernatural construct that could manifest in the physical world during certain conditions, particularly during times of carnival when the barriers between reality and illusion were at their thinnest. The mansion served as a gathering place for the spirits of the dead who had been wealthy and powerful in life and who continued to seek the pleasures and entertainments that had defined their earthly existence. The 25 living guests had been invited not as honored attendees, but as entertainment for the supernatural partygoers who had been waiting for over a century to experience the pleasure of corrupting and consuming the souls of the living. The elaborate costumes and masks that had been provided for the evening were not mere decorations, but supernatural devices that would gradually transform the wearers into permanent residents of the mansion's otherworldly realm. The transformation process had already begun during the hours the guests had spent at the party. The food and wine they had consumed contained supernatural substances that were altering their physical and spiritual essence. The music they had heard was changing their consciousness and making them more susceptible to supernatural influence. And the masks they wore were slowly fusing with their faces to create permanent changes that would make it impossible for them to return to the world of the living. One by one, the 25 guests began to succumb to the supernatural forces that permeated the mansion. Their elaborate costumes became part of their physical bodies, their masks fused permanently with their faces, and their consciousness was absorbed into the collective spirit that animated the Maison Maudite. They became permanent residents of the supernatural party. doomed to spend eternity entertaining the spirits of the dead and serving as hosts for future gatherings. Beauregard Ashworth III was among the first to be consumed, his love of luxury and excess making him particularly susceptible to the mansion's supernatural influence. His transformation was gradual and seductive, as he found himself enjoying the party more and more until he no longer had any desire to leave. His wealth and social connections became part of the mansion's ability to attract future victims, and his knowledge of New Orleans society was absorbed into the supernatural consciousness that controlled the gathering. Celeste Thibodeau's cultural sophistication and social influence made her a valuable addition to the mansion's supernatural community. Her salon hosting skills were incorporated into the entity's ability to create entertaining and seductive gatherings, and her knowledge of art and literature enhanced the cultural atmosphere that made the party so attractive to potential victims. Senator Thaddeus Grimm's political power and corrupt practices were absorbed into the mansion's supernatural authority, giving the entity increased ability to manipulate worldly affairs and to protect itself from investigation or interference by living authorities. His experience with corruption and manipulation became part of the supernatural skills that the mansion used to lure and trap its victims, but 9 of the 25 guests somehow managed to resist the mansion's influence long enough to escape before their transformation was complete. These survivors, including a young banker named Charles Whitmore, a cotton merchant's daughter named Marie Boudreau, a visiting artist named Alessandro Montecros, and 6 others whose names would forever be associated with the Maison Maudit incident, had been saved by a combination of spiritual protection, moral strength, and simple luck that had prevented them from fully succumbing to the supernatural forces. The 9 survivors found themselves able to leave the mansion as dawn broke over New Orleans, but their escape came at a terrible cost. They had been permanently marked by their exposure to the supernatural forces, and they would spend the rest of their lives dealing with the psychological and spiritual consequences of their encounter with the realm of the dead. Charles Whitmore never fully recovered from his experience in the Maison Maudit, and he spent the rest of his life struggling with nightmares and visions that seemed to be memories of the supernatural party. His banking career was destroyed by his inability to concentrate on normal business affairs, and he eventually became a recluse who warned others about the dangers of seeking entertainment that went beyond normal human boundaries. Marie Boudreau was so traumatized by her encounter with the supernatural that she abandoned New Orleans society entirely and became a nun, dedicating her life to prayer and spiritual purification in an attempt to cleanse herself of the corruption she had encountered. In the mansion, her family's wealth and social connections were meaningless to her after she had seen the ultimate consequences of worldly pleasure and excess. The other 7 survivors scattered to different parts of the country, seeking to escape the memories of what they had witnessed and the knowledge that they carried about the supernatural forces that could infiltrate even the most exclusive and sophisticated social gatherings. Some became philanthropists, others joined religious orders, and a few simply disappeared entirely, unable to cope with the burden of their experience. The disappearance of 16 prominent members of New Orleans society sent shockwaves through the city's elite community. These were not unknown individuals or social climbers, but established members of the highest levels of society whose absence was immediately noticed and whose fate became the subject of intense speculation and investigation. The official investigation into the incident was hampered by the reluctance of the 9 survivors to discuss the supernatural aspects of their experience and by the complete lack of physical evidence to support their claims. When authorities searched the Maison Maudit, they found it exactly as it had been for decades, empty, abandoned, and showing no signs of recent habitation or party activity. The mansion itself seemed to have returned to its previous state of supernatural dormancy, with no trace of the elaborate decorations, furniture, or entertainment that the survivors claimed to have witnessed. The building was as dark and forbidding as it had always been, and investigators found no evidence that anyone had been inside the structure for years. But within New Orleans society, the story of the Maison Maudit party became a cautionary tale that was whispered in the most exclusive social circles. The incident served as a reminder that some invitations should never be accepted, some parties should never be attended, and some forms of entertainment came with prices that no amount of wealth or social status could afford to pay. The families of the missing 16 individuals were devastated by the complete disappearance of their loved ones, but they found little support from official sources or from their social peers. The supernatural nature of the incident made it impossible to discuss openly, and the shame associated with having family members involved in such a scandalous event led many to prefer silence over investigation. The incident had lasting effects on New Orleans society, as the elite became more cautious about accepting invitations to exclusive gatherings and more suspicious of entertainment that promised experiences beyond normal social boundaries. The competitive excess that had characterized the 1902 Mardi Gras season was replaced by a more restrained approach to carnival celebrations that emphasized traditional forms of entertainment over exotic or mysterious attractions. The Maison Mardi itself remained abandoned and avoided by both locals and tourists, its reputation for supernatural danger enhanced by the 1902 incident. The building was eventually demolished in the 1950s, but the site where it had stood continued to be associated with supernatural phenomena and was avoided by developers and residents who understood its dark history. Modern paranormal investigators have attempted to study the site of the former Maison Mardi using contemporary research techniques, but their efforts have yielded inconclusive results. The commercial building that now occupies the location occasionally experiences unexplained phenomena, including electrical problems, temperature fluctuations, and reports of music and laughter being heard in empty spaces. The story of the Forbidden Mansion has influenced popular culture and artistic expression well into the modern era, with elements of the tale appearing in numerous books, films, and other works of fiction about New Orleans supernatural phenomena. These fictional treatments often focus on the glamorous aspects of the story while minimizing the genuine horror and human cost represented by the disappearance of 16 people. The case has also attracted the attention of researchers studying the psychology of elite social groups and the relationship between wealth, power, and moral corruption. The detailed accounts of the party's luxury and excess, preserved in the testimonies of the 9 survivors, provide insights into how extreme privilege can lead to spiritual and moral dangers that transcend normal social boundaries. The influence of the Maison Mardi incident on the development of modern party and event safety protocols has been subtle but significant. Many of the precautions that are now standard in exclusive social gatherings can be traced back to lessons learned from supernatural incidents like the one that occurred in 1902, though the true origins of these safety measures are not widely acknowledged. The 9 survivors' later lives were marked by their shared understanding of the supernatural forces that could infiltrate even the most sophisticated social environments. They served as informal guardians of New Orleans society, watching for signs that other social gatherings might be falling under supernatural influence and providing warnings when suspicious invitations appeared in elite social circles. As we reach the end of this haunting journey into the supernatural heart of New Orleans society, we are left with questions that challenge our understanding of the relationship between wealth, privilege, and the forces that exist beyond human comprehension. What really happened to those 16 members of the elite who vanished without a trace in the Maison Mardi? Did they achieve a form of eternal entertainment that allowed them to party for all eternity, or did they fall victim to supernatural forces that fed on human excess and moral corruption? The 9 survivors took their secrets to their graves, but their warnings remain as a testament to the importance of understanding the true cost of the entertainment we seek. And the exclusive ballrooms and private mansions where wealth and privilege create their own rules. Some parties come with prices that no amount of money can pay, and some masks, once worn, can never be removed. The candles that illuminated the Maison Mardi that night may have been extinguished by dawn, but their light continues to flicker in every exclusive gathering, every mysterious invitation, and every moment when the wealthy and powerful seek entertainment that goes beyond the boundaries of normal human experience. For in the end, when we dance with forces we don't understand, we may find that we have joined a party that never ends, and that the price of admission is nothing less than our souls. If this chilling tale of supernatural excess and the ultimate price of privilege has left you questioning what forces might be lurking behind the most exclusive social gatherings, please show your support by hitting that like button. Your engagement helps us continue to explore these forgotten chapters of elite history that remind us why some invitations should never be accepted, and some parties should never be attended. And if you haven't already joined our community of truth seekers here at Bayou Nightmares, make sure to subscribe to our channel. We delve deep into the shadows of history every week, bringing you stories that mainstream sources often overlook or dismiss, from the haunted mansions of New Orleans to the dark corners of wealth and privilege. We explore the mysteries that shaped our social world. It's important to remember that while the stories we share on Bayou Nightmares are carefully researched and based on historical accounts, they are presented as entertainment and educational content. Some elements may be dramatized or interpreted through the lens of folklore and legend, though they are often inspired by real events and genuine human experiences that deserve to be remembered and understood. Until we meet again in the shadows of history, keep questioning the official narratives, keep seeking the truth behind the legends, and remember that sometimes the most exclusive parties are also the most dangerous, and the most elegant entertainment may demand the highest prices. This has been Bayou Nightmares, where the past never truly dies, and the darkest secrets eventually find their way to the light.